My name is Eliana, 36 years old, and I'm currently a federal judge living in Chicago. 7 years ago, my father stood before dozens of people and declared, "From now on, you are no longer a Carter." My younger brother raised his glass, and my mother simply bowed her head in silence. They erased me from the family lineage as if I had never existed, just because I left medicine to become a lawyer. Last week, my mother called in a hushed voice, "Can you come to Ryan's engagement party? But please don't bring up the past." I hung up, my hands still trembling. Have you ever been turned into a stranger by your own flesh and blood? Have you ever chosen to live your truth only to have your entire family turn their backs on you? If this story touches something inside you, leave a comment below, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Because what they were hiding behind that celebration was a secret that could tear the entire family apart. And I was going to be the one to bring it into the light. I still remember that dimly lit room, glowing from the crystal chandelier above the long dining table draped in ivory linen. The scent of roast turkey, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie blended in the air, evoking every memory I once loved about childhood Thanksgivings. But that night held none of the warmth, none of the love. Only a cold, suffocating silence that felt like a blade aimed straight at the softest part of my heart. When Ryan stood up, I felt something shift. My brother, the pride of my father, the first one introduced at every family gathering. His gray suit had no wrinkles, his white collar stiff with starch. The wine glass in his hand shimmered under the light, but his eyes were icy. "I'd like to say a few words," Ryan said, smiling at our relatives who were mid-meal. "This Thanksgiving is special, not just because we honor our ancestors, but because we must be honest with each other about what truly matters in a family." I saw my mother gently set down her fork and knife. Her hand trembled slightly. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression content, like he already knew what Ryan was going to say. Ryan raised his glass. "The Carter family holds a proud tradition. Generations of doctors, healers, bringing not only prestige to Memorial Hospital, but to the Carter name itself. Sadly, not everyone was strong enough to carry that legacy forward." People started glancing at each other, confused. Some eyes turned toward me, cautious, probing. "My sister, Eliana." Ryan turned to look at me, a forced smile tugging at his lips. "Left medical school after her second year to pursue law." A spoon clattered from Aunt Charlotte's side of the table. I sat frozen, hands on my lap, cold as stone. I couldn't tell what hurt more, my heart or my faith. "She told our parents she wanted to fight for justice," Ryan went on, his voice mimicking me like a child's. "But I've always thought, who fights for justice better than a doctor? What's more just than saving a life?" A few chuckles floated around, uneasy. Ryan looked at me again. "Not everyone is strong enough to carry what our parents built with their lives. But hey, to each their own. Today I just want to thank those who are still here, who still embody the true Carter spirit." He lifted his glass higher. "To tradition. To honor. And to those who don't quit halfway." My throat tightened. I couldn't swallow a sip of water. I scanned the table. Every face I once adored now looked like wax, still indifferent. No one spoke up. No one stood for me. Not even my mother, who kept her eyes down. Then my father spoke. "Thank you, Ryan," he said, his voice steady and clear like when he addressed the medical board. "I don't have much to add. Ryan has said it all for me. Eliana," he turned to me, "you can live whatever life you choose. But don't expect to return here with the Carter name." I stared at him, stunned. I thought I misheard. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice shaking, heart pounding. "I mean," he said slowly, "from this moment you are no longer my daughter." Something inside me shattered. The wall I had built around my heart collapsed under the weight of those words. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. No one said a word. No one stopped me. My mother still stared down. Ryan looked away. The air felt thick, like I was an intruder in a family I never belonged to. I walked away from the table, eyes blurred with tears. I opened the tall dining room door and stepped into the cold stone hallway. Just as I reached the front door, an elderly voice called behind me. "Eliana." I turned. My grandfather, Richard Carter, stood there leaning on his cane, his eyes sharp and knowing as if he had seen it all. No anger. No doubt. Just quiet compassion and something I didn't expect. Faith. He walked toward me, slow but sure, and placed a sealed envelope in my hand. "Don't read it yet," he said. "When you're ready to face everything, open it." I clutched the envelope, shaking. He squeezed my hand, then looked into my eyes. "They don't know where you'll go. But I do. And one day they'll know too." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat closed tight. I turned and stepped into the freezing night. No coat, no luggage, only pain and the letter he gave me. The heavy door closed behind me with a thud. That night, I wandered in the early winter cold, not knowing where to go, only knowing this: if I couldn't belong in that family, I'd build a place of my own. A new life. A new path. And a name they would one day remember, not because of blood but because of the choice they once dismissed. I left that house and never looked back. The envelope from my grandfather stayed in my coat pocket, oddly warm in the bitter cold. I had no plan, nowhere to go. My bank account barely covered 3 more weeks of rent. But one thing was clear: I couldn't go back. I found a small room in South Loop on the 5th floor of an old building with an elevator that always got stuck between the 3rd and 4th floors. The room barely fit a twin bed, a worn desk, and a tiny electric stove. Each night I stuffed a towel into the window crack to block the wind. At first I cried when rusted pipes dripped into the sink. But then I stopped. Because I realized, this was my beginning, not my end. I studied during the day and worked nights as a legal assistant at a small civil law office. At first they had me making coffee, filing paperwork, answering phones. But I didn't complain. I memorized courtroom dialogues, studied contracts, learned how to prepare litigation files. I worked late, living off cup noodles and leftover sandwiches from meetings. I wasn't living, I was surviving. But I was surviving with purpose. One night, while I was cleaning the whiteboard after a staff meeting, the lead attorney, Lynn Marrow, paused and looked at me. "What year are you in?" she asked. "First year, Chicago Law School," I replied, setting down my pen. She nodded. "I've noticed you take more notes than my interns. Want to try drafting a complaint?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That night I stayed up until 3 in the morning, researching every clause, fixing every comma. The next day she submitted my draft for a tenant dispute case to the court without a single edit. Seeing my name on official legal paperwork, it felt like a sliver of dignity returned. 3 years later I graduated at the top of my class. No one from my family came to my graduation. I scanned every row just to be sure. But then I saw my grandfather. He stood in the back row, cane in hand, nodding at me like he was saying, "I told you so." After the ceremony, he hugged me tightly and quietly slipped another envelope into my hand. It was a check to pay for the final semester I hadn't been able to afford. I cried the whole way home. I joined the city's public defender's office, starting with small cases: rent disputes, domestic violence, neighbor complaints. But each case was someone's story that had been ignored. Every woman kicked out of her home with 2 kids, every elderly man tricked into signing away his house. They all reminded me of myself. One day, I was representing a single mother whose apartment was being seized by the bank while she was undergoing cancer treatment. I tore through the entire loan agreement and uncovered evidence that the bank had manipulated the terms. I didn't just help her keep her home, I made the bank pay damages for emotional distress. The local paper wrote about the case, and for the first time, my name appeared under a headline that read, "Young Attorney Wins Against Major Financial Corporation." After that case, I was invited to work for a nonprofit that helps the homeless fight for their legal rights. The salary was far lower than at big law firms, but every workday was a reminder that I was living true to my values. One autumn afternoon, I was sitting in the park reviewing case files when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I picked up. A woman's voice, calm and authoritative, came through. "This is Harriet Monroe, Chief Judge of the Cook County Superior Court. I heard about you from an old colleague. His name is Richard Carter." My grip on the phone tightened. My heart caught in my throat. "He told me that if I wanted someone who understands the law like they understand people, I should call you." I didn't say a word. I could only hear my own heartbeat. "We're looking for candidates for the position of youngest federal judge. I know you're young. But I was once the youngest woman to hold this seat 20 years ago. If you're ready, I want to nominate you." I stood up, my hands trembling. The people walking past that park had no idea that the woman in a blue coat, standing quietly beneath falling leaves, was taking a call that would change her life. The vetting process was rigorous. Every legal decision I had ever made, every word I'd spoken in a courtroom, was questioned. Someone even asked, "Do you think you can be impartial without a legal family background?" I smiled and replied, "My family doesn't have a legal tradition. But we do have a tradition of standing with those pushed to the margins." At 33, I was sworn in by Chief Judge Monroe. My father wasn't in the room. Nor was my mother. Nor Ryan. Only my grandfather's photograph rested in a small frame on the table. I wore the black robe, stepped up to the bench, and in that moment I understood I hadn't just survived. I had built an entire kingdom from what others discarded. That evening, I went home, opened the drawer where I had kept the letter my grandfather gave me 7 years ago. The letter he titled, "Read this when you're ready to return with your head held high." I picked it up, tracing the yellowed edges. The letter was still intact. And I was ready. A week before Ryan's engagement party, I had just returned from a morning hearing when my assistant, Ashley, handed me a fresh stack of mail to sign. I flipped through the envelopes, mostly legal documents and industry event invitations. But then I stopped when I saw a pale cream envelope, the handwriting so familiar it made my chest tighten. To Eliana, written in soft purple ink, slightly shaky as if the writer hadn't held a pen in a long time. I knew instantly it was from my mother. A faint lavender scent rose as I broke the seal. Inside was an engagement invitation for Ryan and Madeline Ross. Formal, filled with ornate lettering and silver-embossed address details. But what took my breath away was the small note tucked behind the card. "Eliana, I miss you. Please come. It's just Ryan and the fiancé's family. No one from our side. No one to make you uncomfortable. Love, Mom." I read that line over and over. Each time, a new wave of emotion washed over me, soft and raw, tangled with anger. I didn't know how to feel. After all those years of silence, she had written only a few short lines, as if none of the distance had ever existed. I put the letter down, poured myself a glass of water, trying to calm the storm in my mind. I didn't believe this family event was as simple as she claimed. Ryan had never done anything without intention. And I didn't think my brother would invite me just to reconcile. Something was waiting for me at that party. I needed to know what I was walking into. I opened my laptop and typed Madeline Ross into the search bar, followed by law and Chicago to narrow the results. The search loaded quickly. A LinkedIn profile appeared. A woman with light brown hair, sharp eyes, wearing a plain white blouse. Below her name was the title, Assistant Legal Counsel, Silverbrook Industries. Silverbrook. I froze for a few seconds. That name wasn't unfamiliar. 6 months ago, in a particularly sensitive civil case, a young woman sued her ex-husband, an executive at Silverbrook, for physical abuse and using company influence to threaten her custody rights. I was the presiding judge. She was fragile, bruised, but determined. The defendant's lawyers tried to blame her, claiming she fabricated stories to gain custody. I ruled in the wife's favor based on credible testimony and solid evidence. I even issued a special recommendation for an internal investigation at Silverbrook, as records showed the company had been aware of the executive's misconduct but turned a blind eye. That day, a woman representing the plaintiff's legal team had presented parts of the case file and supported the lead attorney with detailed arguments. She didn't speak directly during the trial, but I remembered the strength in her gaze as she handed over the documents. I remembered it clearly because afterward I glanced at her name tag, Madeline R. I turned back to the screen. Comparing the LinkedIn photo to my courtroom memory, everything began to align. Madeline Ross, Ryan's fiancée, had once stood in my courtroom. I leaned back in my chair, feeling like someone had pulled back the curtain on a show I never agreed to join. What exactly was the relationship between Ryan and Madeline? Did my brother know his fiancée had been involved in a case connected to a company his family held shares in? Or was he the one with something to hide? And Madeline, did she know who I was? I kept searching. Public legal records showed Madeline had worked for several nonprofits that protected women and children. Before joining Silverbrook, she was at Legal Voice, an organization that advocates for domestic violence survivors. I read every line of her background as if piecing together a puzzle no one wanted me to solve. My phone buzzed. It was Maya, my best friend since college. "Heard there's an engagement? You're actually going?" I replied, Of course. But not to reconcile. She sent a question mark. I typed, Ryan's fiancée stood in my courtroom. During the Silverbrook case. Maya, wait, what? That's real? I didn't reply right away. I stood up and walked over to the wooden cabinet where I kept files from cases I'd presided over. Under the label, Domestic Violence, 6 months ago, I pulled out a folder marked with all related names. It was clear. Madeline hadn't just been a staff attorney in that sensitive case. She likely knew about Silverbrook's misconduct, a company her future in-laws had major stakes in. I sat back down, reopened the invitation, and this time paid closer attention to the venue, Rose Garden Estate in the northern suburbs. A lavish, secluded place, perfect for keeping stories within private walls. I could see it now. A dazzling party, hollow toasts, and me, the unexpected guest, stepping in like a strange wind shaking everything loose. I held the invitation between my fingers. What stirred in me wasn't fear. It was curiosity, caution, and a deep ache I couldn't quite name. My mother had written, just the fiancé's family, as if that would reassure me. But to me that line was a warning. Fewer family members meant more control. And if there was something to hide, people always started with just. I got up, walked into my bedroom, and opened the wardrobe to choose a dark dress. Every move I made felt like muscle memory, not out of excitement, not from nerves, but from something far more certain. It was time I walked into the room they'd kept me out of for 7 years. And I would not stay silent. I drove away from the courthouse around 6 in the evening, the Chicago sky fading from pale blue to a dusky gray, reflecting off the windshield like fragments of old memories quietly drifting back. I didn't head straight to my apartment. Instead, I turned onto an old route that led to Maple Street, a tree-lined road with towering oaks, where I used to ride my bike as a child, chasing the sound of my grandfather's laughter echoing from the porch. The house he left me still stood tall among the hydrangeas, its reddish-brown roof and moss-covered brick walls aged with time but never losing their warmth. I'd had the roof repaired, kept the old lantern hanging by the door, and repainted each window shutter in his favorite shade, soft slate blue. Over the years, it had remained my quiet refuge amid the heavy rhythms of courtrooms and sentencing. I stepped inside. The warm golden light spilled across the old wooden floor, where faint scratches from his cane still remained. I took off my coat, hung it near the door, and walked straight into his study. The room still held his scent, mild tobacco, worn leather, and old paper, as if he'd only just stepped out and might return at any moment. The oak desk sat in its usual place beneath the window that looked out onto the garden. I opened the second drawer on the right where I had kept the letter for 7 years. The letter my grandfather gave me the night I walked out of that house, telling me, "Only open this when you're ready to come back without bowing your head." At the time I thought he meant pride. But sitting there in his worn leather chair, I realized he was talking about resolve. The moment when truth no longer terrifies you, but becomes something you're finally ready to face, wherever it may lead. I used a letter opener to carefully break the seal, my heart beating slow but heavy. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. His handwriting was just as I remembered, strong, clear, without a single correction. My dearest Eliana, by the time you read this, you might have gone farther than anyone in this family ever believed you could. I don't need to know what you've become because to me, you've always been yourself. And that's something no one in this family ever truly understood the value of. I paused, taking a deep breath. My eyes were filled with tears I still hadn't let fall. I used to think the strongest person was the one who spoke the loudest in the room. But over time I learned the strongest is the one who stands their ground when everyone else turns their back. That's what I've always seen in you, Eliana. I brushed the edge of the paper with my fingertips, almost feeling the palm of his hand in that last grip he gave me. You chose a different path. Not out of fear, but because you listened to yourself, something very few in our family ever dared to do. They called you a traitor. And they'll call you worse. But remember this, one day they'll need you. Not because of power, but because of truth. Each line felt like it whispered into the deepest part of me. A feeling both unfamiliar and strangely familiar began to rise. Not anger, not pain, but clarity. Truth, Eliana, doesn't need to be shouted. Finds its way back. And you must be ready when it does. I sat in silence for a long time before I read the final lines of the letter. His handwriting now a bit more slanted, his hand likely shaking, but the words still carried weight. There are secrets in the Carter family that have never come to light. But when they do, you'll be the only one left standing. My heart clenched. I looked out the window where the sunset was casting gold across the backyard trees. I didn't know exactly what he was referring to, but somehow deep inside I believed him. I folded the letter back up, placed it in a plastic sleeve and tucked it into the top drawer of the desk. Then I stood and opened the small built-in cabinet where he used to keep his treasured keepsakes. Inside was a dark wooden box I had never opened. I took it out, placed it on the desk and opened the lid. Inside was a gold pocket watch engraved on the back with the initials WRC, William Richard Carter. Next to it was a faded black and white photo. Me at 10 years old standing beside him at a school fair, his hand on my shoulder and me beaming like the world belonged to the two of us. I held the watch in my palm, feeling its precise weight. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was a reminder that I wasn't stepping into this battle alone. That night I didn't go to bed early. I sat at the oak desk, reviewing every file on Madeline Ross, on Silverbrook, on all the connections between her family and the corporations I had once questioned. I connected the dots and found a series of transactions linked to the charitable foundation Ryan managed. One of the beneficiaries shared the exact name and address as a company from a past lawsuit. Same year. Same location. I didn't know what awaited me at the upcoming engagement celebration. But my grandfather had been right. The truth was returning. And I, though still carrying the scars of abandonment, was now strong enough to face it. Not to prove anything to them, but to look directly at what they tried to hide. And to make sure that truth stayed alive. I arrived at Rose Garden Estate just as the afternoon sun dipped behind the old pine trees. Along the stone path leading to the main hall, the golden lights in the garden cast a soft glow over the perfectly manicured flower pots. Laughter floated in from the backyard mixed with the clinking of glasses, the familiar sounds of a Carter gathering, elegant, measured, and a little cold. I stepped out of the car wearing a sleek black dress with a square neckline and long sleeves, paired with heels sturdy enough to hold my ground but refined enough to assert quiet power. Maya had chosen the outfit 3 days ago after saying firmly, "You're not going there to make peace. You're going to remind them they don't get to rewrite the story without your name in it." The glass doors opened and a staff member gave a polite bow, leading me into the foyer. The air smelled of polished mahogany and fresh lilies. I scanned the room, spotting familiar faces. Doctors, attorneys, the same people who sat at our Thanksgiving table years ago, when Ryan stood up to speak and my father erased my name from the family. They saw me too. A flicker of confusion crossed their eyes. A few forced polite smiles. Others simply nodded, unsure how to react. I moved into the outdoor space, where the engagement dinner was being held beneath a vast white canopy strung with twinkling lights. Long cream-covered tables, champagne glasses full, soft violin music drifting from a small ensemble near the stage. It looked exactly like a high-end wedding reception, except for one thing: warmth. I wasn't looking for anyone. I simply walked slowly, eyes forward, back straight, not holding any smile for too long. And then I heard that voice just beyond the archway. "Your Honor." I turned around. Madeline stood a few steps away in an elegant white dress, her hair styled in soft waves. Her face showed both surprise and confusion, like she was trying to reconcile two images in her mind that wouldn't quite fit. "I didn't know you were family," she stammered, then paused, clearly unsure how to address someone she'd once bowed to in court. I smiled and walked toward her calmly. "I was invited," I said, my gaze steady. The air around us seemed to still. The people nearby turned to look, their expressions shifting from curiosity to caution. Madeline was still staring at me, her face slowly changing from confusion to deep realization, as if she had finally solved the last piece of a long-standing mystery. I saw Ryan approaching quickly, his breath uneven like he had run from across the garden. He froze when he saw me standing in front of Madeline. "Eliana," he said, his voice dry. "No one told me about this." "Because you weren't the one who sent the invitation," I replied, locking eyes with my brother. My father appeared just seconds later. He stopped next to Ryan, his face stunned when he saw me. He didn't say anything, but the tightness at his temples and the press of his lips told me he was holding back a sentence he knew better than to speak aloud in front of everyone. "You dressed quite elegantly," he finally said, his tone light but strained. The granddaughter of William Carter can't show up looking ordinary at a Carter family gathering, I replied, then shifted my gaze to Ryan. Or would you prefer I showed up in my judicial robe? Madeline quietly observed the exchange, her hand gripping the strap of her small purse. Then she took a deep breath and looked at Ryan. Why didn't you tell me? Eliana is your sister, she asked, her voice soft but firm. Ryan avoided her eyes, clearly unsettled. I didn't think it was necessary. Not necessary, she repeated, her face going pale. I stood before her in court. I've quoted her rulings in a training session for Silverbrook's legal team. And you think that wasn't necessary? No one said a word. I didn't intend to interrupt that moment, but I didn't walk away either. I stood there watching a piece of the truth Ryan had buried begin to surface, slowly and unmistakably. Madeline turned to look at me, not with admiration like she once had in court, but like a woman seeing another for what she truly was, and realizing she'd been kept in the dark. You presided over the Silverbrook case, didn't you? She asked, though she already knew the answer. I did, I replied, my voice calm and flat, but as clear as a blade. She turned back to Ryan, her voice trembling. Did you know about that case? Ryan remained silent. Ryan, she repeated, sharper now. Did you know? He still didn't respond. Madeline nodded, lips pressed tight, eyes reddening. Then she turned away, pulled her phone from her purse, typed something quickly, hit send, and looked back up at me. You knew who I was from the beginning? She asked. I wasn't sure at first, I answered truthfully. Not until I revisited the old case files. And you still came? I was invited, I reminded her. And because there are things that need to be brought into the light. Not just for me, but for you too. Madeline stared at me for a long moment. Then she gave a slight nod, turned, and walked into the tent, leaving Ryan behind. Leaving behind the stares of dozens of guests who had just witnessed the quiet unraveling of a story built on silence and self-satisfaction. I stayed where I was, neither retreating nor advancing. The atmosphere had shattered, but I knew this was only the first crack. I left the garden just as the clock struck 8:15. Inside, the air was still thick, like everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first, but no one knew what to say. The warm lights now looked pale, drained of the joy of an engagement and more like the closing act of a play no one finished performing. I was headed toward my car when I saw Madeline leaning against a column near the side entrance, arms wrapped around a thin shawl, eyes cast into the distance like she was trying to hold on to a truth slipping through her fingers. As I approached, she looked up, her face showing signs of exhaustion and confusion. Would you talk with me for a few minutes? She asked, her voice hoarse and faint, lacking the courtroom confidence she usually carried. I nodded. We stepped into a side hallway where the lights were dimmer and no other guests passed by. Madeline closed the door behind us, then turned to me, her hands clasped in front of her. I think there are some things you need to know, she began, her gaze locked onto mine. I didn't respond, just listened. About 3 months ago, she said slowly, I was given access to some internal Carter Foundation documents while preparing a fundraising speech on Ryan's behalf. In those files, I found some strange transaction records, large transfers to a series of nonprofit organizations I'd never heard of. When I asked Ryan, he said they were international partnerships, but couldn't provide any real details. I tilted my head slightly, eyes narrowing. At first, I just thought it was odd, she continued. But then one of those recipient organizations, Clear Path Coalition, popped up in an internal Silverbrook memo, listed under lobbying expenses. I followed up with the legal team, but they said it was an external transaction, not handled by them. I felt my breath slow. Do you have copies? I asked quietly. Madeline reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. I backed up the entire folder before they revoked my access. No one knows. I took the USB and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. I don't know exactly what I'm seeing, she said, but my gut tells me something is wrong. And now I understand why your brother, and your entire family, never talk about you. You're the only one who can see things for what they are. I exhaled slowly. I've been tracking a web of shell companies laundering funds through charitable fronts for over a year. They disguise shady investment flows by labeling them as community grants. But I couldn't find a clear tie to any big-name organization. Not until now. Is the Carter Foundation the missing link? she asked, almost whispering. I nodded. It very well might be. One of the companies you mentioned, ClearPath, has shown up in an FBI watch report I accessed in my capacity as a federal judge. But I haven't had enough grounds to initiate a formal investigation. Madeline stepped slowly toward the windowsill, clutching her shawl tightly like she was bracing against a cold that had crept inside her chest. Is Ryan involved? She asked, not turning around. I hesitated a moment. I don't know. But he's the Foundation's CFO. And some of the transfer authorizations match signature samples I've seen in notarized documents. She turned back toward me, her expression equal parts hurt and haunted. I didn't want to believe it, she whispered. Ryan has good sides, but he also craves approval too much. He's always trying to prove to your father that he's worthy. And to me too. He never let me forget that I'm a Ross and he's a Carter. But I never thought he'd go this far. I knew that feeling. The moment you realize the person you love isn't who you thought they were. I'd lived with that truth for most of my adult life. Madeline looked at me, her eyes beginning to shine with tears. If you're going to do something, I want to help, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Not for revenge, but to make sure the name I'm about to carry, if I still choose to carry it, doesn't become a shield for corruption. I looked at her. For the first time all night, I saw something familiar in this young woman's eyes. Courage. I'll need you to testify, I said softly. It might be internal. It might be in court. She nodded. I will. We stood there for a while in silence. The music from the party had faded. No more clinking glasses. Just the breeze rustling through the hydrangeas outside, and the quiet resonance of two women laying the first stone in the path to the truth. I took out my phone and sent an encrypted message to an old contact at the FBI's anti-money laundering division. New lead. Meet me tomorrow morning. It's safe now. The evidence is complete. Madeline gently touched my hand. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't need to ruin a wedding, I replied softly. I just need to bring light to where they thought darkness would always protect them. She nodded slowly. We both knew there was no turning back from this moment on. But we also knew one thing. The truth has never needed anyone's permission to exist. And this time it would speak. The morning after the engagement party, there were no congratulatory text threads, no social media posts like every other Carter family milestone. Rose Garden Estate was shrouded in a heavy silence, like a castle after a stormy night. I woke early, slipped into a fitted black suit, tied my hair back in a low bun, no makeup, just a touch of moisturizer and a light pair of glasses. I wasn't going as the little sister. I was going as the only one willing to call out what everyone else kept dodging. Madeline had texted me at 7. I told Ryan the wedding should be postponed. He disagreed. But I'm not changing my mind. I replied, good. I need you there when I speak to them. Around 8, I walked into my father's office in the main house. It hadn't changed much since I was in high school. The same heavy mahogany desk, the same portrait of my grandfather hanging behind the chair, like a shadow always watching the decisions of the next generation. Ryan was already there, fingers laced, eyes locked on the floor. My father stood by the window, back turned, hands tucked into the pockets of his suit as usual. When I walked in, no one greeted me. I didn't wait for it either. Madeline came in behind me. She stood near the edge of the desk, eyes steady, not avoiding mine. I pulled a slim file from my bag and placed it on the desk. My voice was calm. We need to talk. Sooner rather than later, before this spirals out of control. My father didn't turn, still gazing out at the mist-covered garden. Ryan looked up, his eyes bloodshot. You really think this is the best way to handle everything? He asked, voice hoarse. I looked at my brother, my gaze unwavering. I think the truth is the only thing left. I opened the file and pushed it toward Ryan. These are the Carter Foundation's bank statements for the past 3 months. The transfers to ClearPath, Hope Horizon, and a group called Bright Leaf. All traceable to a network of shell companies currently under FBI investigation for laundering money through so-called community grants. Ryan didn't touch the file. His lips tightened. His jaw locked. My father stepped away from the window, moving to stand by the desk. His voice was low, but the fury beneath his restraint was unmistakable. You're really going to turn on your own blood? I didn't flinch. I stood straight, one hand resting gently on the desk. I'm not turning on anyone. I'm presenting the truth. What they choose to do with it is their decision. Ryan let out a sharp breath, standing suddenly. You've hated me since I was in high school. You've always thought you were better than me. This is your payback, isn't it? No, Ryan, I said, voice quieter but every word clear. I don't hate you. I grieve for you. You had every chance to walk the right path. And instead you dodged it, then buried yourself in paperwork that looked clean but reeked beneath the surface. Those organizations were legal grant recipients, Ryan snapped. I checked. I followed the protocol. And you never wondered why there were no transparent reports from any of them? No real offices? No documented outreach. Madeline cut in, voice calm but firm. I trusted you, Ryan. Not anymore. My father slammed his palm against the desk so hard the room seemed to tremble. Ridiculous. One of you dropped out of med school, the other just sabotaged an engagement, and now you're both back here lecturing this family about honor. I looked at him. I didn't feel small in his presence. Honor without integrity is an empty shell, Dad, I said slowly. Grandpa told me once, you don't need to carry the Carter name to live with decency. I chose to keep this name not out of pride, but responsibility. And that responsibility won't let me pretend I don't see what's happening. He clenched his jaw and turned back to the window in silence. Ryan sank into his chair like the strength had drained from his body. I didn't think it would go this far, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. I thought I was in control. No one can keep the truth buried forever, Ryan, I said. It just waits until someone finally faces it. Madeline stepped forward, pulled out her phone and played an audio file. Ryan's voice echoed from the recording. A conversation from the night before, secretly recorded. In it he said, everybody does this. It's not a big deal. It was the defense of someone who had been lying to himself for a long time. I looked at my father one last time. If there's anything left of this family that you want to protect, cooperate with the investigation. Hiding now will only make everything collapse faster. No one answered. The room fell into silence. Only the tick of the wall clock remained, like a quiet reminder that time for lies was running out. I gathered the file, folded it carefully. As I reached the door, my father's voice called out, rough and low, "You think your grandfather would be proud of what you're doing?" I paused, turned and met his eyes. "No, Dad. I don't think." "I know." The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the east windows of Rose Garden Estate, everything looked like a typical quiet morning. I sat in the second-floor parlor, a cup of warm mint tea in hand, hearing the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Downstairs, maybe my mother was telling the housekeeper to clean up the last of the pastries from the night before. Ryan hadn't been seen since last night. His door remained shut, silent, as if even he wasn't ready to face what had been exposed. I set the cup down and stepped to the window. Outside, the hydrangea garden was lightly veiled in mist, sunlight shimmering across the damp grass. I heard wheels on the gravel drive, not an ordinary car. Heavier, rhythmic, like a convoy moving in with purpose. I didn't need to look down to know what was coming. 3 sleek black SUVs pulled up in unison at the front steps. The doors opened almost simultaneously. 7 men and women in FBI jackets stepped out, carrying folders, some with earpieces, scanning the grounds. Leading them was Agent Michael Tran, a face I recognized from a financial crimes seminar 4 years ago. He didn't glance up at the window, but I knew he was doing exactly what we had quietly coordinated for the past 2 weeks. I left the room, walking steadily down the stairs. My mother stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, dish towel still in hand, her face paling as she saw the group entering the main hall. What is this?" she asked, barely able to breathe. Michael Tran stepped forward and pulled out his badge. "FBI. We have a warrant to search the premises and arrest 2 individuals in connection with a money laundering and tax fraud investigation involving the Carter Foundation. Please remain calm and cooperate." I stood at the foot of the stairs, my hand lightly resting on the wooden railing. My heart wasn't racing. It beat slow and steady, like the ticking of a second hand in my mind. Not from fear, but because I had known this moment would come, sooner or later. "Is Ryan Carter here?" Michael asked, his eyes scanning the house like he already knew its layout by heart. A figure emerged from the west hallway. It was Ryan. His shirt was hastily buttoned, his hair still messy, and the usual confidence in his face had vanished, replaced by something strangely hollow. "That's me," he said, voice raspy. Michael stepped closer, clearly reading out the arrest warrant, then cuffed Ryan in one fluid motion, quick and practiced but not rough. As the metal clicked shut, the entire estate seemed to freeze in place. My mother stumbled, catching herself on the table, her lips moving but no sound coming out. I walked to her, held her arm, her skin was cold as stone. "What is this, Eliana? There has to be some mistake, right?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I looked toward Michael, who had already motioned for his team to proceed to the study, where my cousin, Nathaniel Carter, was sitting with his morning coffee. Nathaniel was escorted out just a few minutes later. He put up a verbal fight just like any Ivy League-trained attorney would. "I'm an oversight shareholder. I wasn't involved in direct financial operations. This is an overreach, I'll call my lawyer." Michael didn't respond. He simply read aloud the names of the companies involved, including Bright Leaf and Hope Horizon, then walked Nathaniel out without revealing a single emotion. Ryan was led toward the door. He looked at no one but me. "It was you, wasn't it?" he asked, not with anger, but with the voice of someone who'd been treading water in the dark for too long and had finally run out of strength. "You're the one who reported me?" I didn't shy away from his gaze. "Yes. But not because I'm your sister. Because I'm a citizen in a country where justice is meant to stand above bloodlines." He looked like he wanted to say something else but only bowed his head. His figure disappeared behind the tinted glass of the SUV. The agents left just as they came, professional, silent, without a single unnecessary word. The house returned to the sound of wind brushing through the halls, and the clink of teacups trembling on the silver tray the housekeeper had abandoned the moment the team walked in. I turned around and saw Madeline standing at the far end of the upstairs hallway. She wore a silvery gray silk nightgown, her hair loose over her shoulders, her eyes glassy with tears but still proud, just like the night before. She slowly descended the stairs and stopped beside me. "You didn't say anything ahead of time," she said, not with accusation but as an observation. "I couldn't," I replied gently. "If anything leaked, all the evidence would have vanished." Madeline nodded. "I understand." She looked at me for a few seconds, her gaze soft but steady, then said in a quiet, thoughtful voice, choosing her words with care, "You're not just strong, Eliana. You're good." I didn't know how to respond. Words like that don't come to me often, especially not from someone who'd just lost her fiancé. But there was no bitterness in the way she said it. Only relief. As if what she had feared most wasn't the heartbreak, but the idea of continuing to live a life built on lies. And now that weight had been lifted. I left the Carter estate after the sun had climbed above the tall maple tree in the backyard. Before getting into my car, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The walls were still white. The roof still red. But something in its core had begun to shift. No one in that house knew I was the one who sent the files to the FBI. On the official record, I was just an anonymous whistleblower, protected under federal law. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it for one reason only, so that when I looked in the mirror every morning, I could still see the woman my grandfather once believed in. The woman he called the real Marshal of this generation. A year later, on a sunny fall afternoon, I walked into the press room at the Vermont governor's office wearing a simple navy blue suit. There were no blinding flashes, no intrusive lights, only sincere eyes and a quiet that's rare in political media circles. Behind the podium was a neatly folded American flag. Governor Miranda Cross extended her hand, her eyes shining with real belief as she introduced Judge Eliana Carter, our nominee to the Vermont State Supreme Court. I stood at the mic, my hands slightly trembling. But when I saw the front row, my mother sitting in a soft gray cardigan, holding a handbag embroidered with a single C, my fears melted. She smiled. No lipstick like she used to wear, but in her eyes was something I thought had been lost between us. Love without judgment. After the press conference, she and I walked to a small Italian bistro near the town square, iron chairs rusting slightly among plastic grapevines. I ordered the butternut squash soup. She chose the lasagna. We talked about the coming winter, her little garden at the new apartment, and the new cushion chair she bought online. "Got it on sale, just $99, she said proudly, like it was some personal victory. We had dinner like that twice a month. We didn't bring up the old mansion, didn't mention Ryan, didn't poke at wounds that ran too deep. We hadn't fully forgiven each other, but I had come to realize, sometimes gentleness is the strongest way to begin again. Madeline stayed in touch. A month after Ryan's arrest, she sent me a handwritten letter. Blue ink, neat cursive. Thank you for not staying silent. Because of you, I don't have to carry the Carter name for the rest of my life. I never wrote back. But 3 months later, I made an anonymous donation to a nonprofit newly founded under the name Safe Echoes, a legal and psychological support center for women who'd suffered abuse. The founder, Madeline Ross. I reviewed their financial reports and growth plans every quarter, quietly as a silent donor. Madeline never asked about the funds. But on the day they opened their second office in Burlington, she sent me a photo. She and 3 women standing beneath a sign that read Safe Echoes North Branch. She was smiling gently in the photo, but I saw peace. Finally, after years of being bound by silence. One April morning, I returned to Willowside Cemetery, carrying a small leather-framed photo. I walked from the gate beneath the weeping willows and stopped in front of my grandfather's grave, the only man in my family who ever called me his hope. The stone still bore the same inscription, Thomas Carter, a man of his word in a world of doubt. I knelt, placing the photo from my swearing-in ceremony atop the stone. In the photo, I stood before the governor and chief justice, my right hand raised, my eyes forward with no fear left in them. And I whispered, I didn't take revenge, Grandpa. I only told the truth. And I lived the way you believed I could. I stayed there for a long time, the wind brushing past my shoulders, leaves rustling over dry grass. I missed him not just for what he did for me, but because he saw me, long before I was able to see myself. On the way home, I stopped by an old bookstore where I used to work part-time when I was 19. The owner, Elaine, was still there, her hair grayer but her memory still sharp. You used to sit right there and read To Kill a Mockingbird, she said, pointing to the old chair by the window. I smiled. Now I live that story every day, I said. At the checkout counter, I picked up a deep navy leather notebook. I planned to fill it with cases that never made the news, with the faces of those who once sat in court with pleading eyes. And maybe one day I'll use that very notebook to teach young law students that justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about who dares to step into the darkness to light even a single flame. I don't know how many challenges lie ahead. But I'm not walking alone. And more importantly, I'm not walking in silence anymore. My story may not be exactly like yours. But if you've ever felt pushed out of your own home, ever been called a stranger by people who share your blood, ever had to get back up when no one reached out a hand, then maybe, just maybe, we share something. What do you think of the way I chose to face my family? Is truth really worth more than comfortable illusions? Do you believe that kindness doesn't have to mean weakness, and that sometimes true strength is when you still show compassion, after all the hurt? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your story because maybe, just maybe, it will help someone out there find themselves again. If you believe that every family has unspoken truths, and that within each of us lies a journey worth telling, don't forget to follow this channel. The next stories won't just be about tears or justice. They'll be about forgiveness, choice, and the many ways we each redefine one word, family.